And folks, news outlets that push this fake news, they were given awards. Journalists who reported the truth, they were censored and they were harassed. Politicians use this to grandstand about foreign threats and attacks on democracy, all while peddling false information to undermine America's elections. I'd like to top it off. Politicized investigations using fraudulent information were used in an attempt to remove a sitting president from office. Now, this is, of course, about the fake claims that Trump had colluded with Russia to undermine the 2016 elections. We've now learned that the evidence in the case was just fabricated opposition research. We've now learned that many people knowingly peddled that false information, and they even lied to make it seem that evidence existed when it did not. And we just recently learned, folks, that the FBI launched its investigation on false premises. That's right, false premises. We also saw how this was used to appoint Special Counsel Robert Mueller to investigate then-President Donald Trump. And we saw how all of this was used for election interference and for a scheme to try to remove a president from office. In other words, what was just watched, what we all just saw, that was a palace coup in the truest sense of the phrase. Or at least, look, an attempted palace coup. A coup d'etat is a seizure and removal of a government and its power. A palace coup is a specific form of a coup d'etat. It involves the overthrow of a government from the inside. It's where one faction of the government displaces another faction. Look, I was among the first journalists to call this scandal out, to call it what it was. That started with an Epoch Times article in May of 2017 titled, "Despite Allegations, No Evidence of Trump-Russia Collusion Found." Look, we followed that with deeper investigations myself and others did at the Epoch Times, which really revealed the full story on that. We also published several now famous investigations, infographics, authored by Epoch Times host Jeff Carlson, and they detailed how this scandal unfolded and who was involved. Look, for doing that, for telling the truth, we were labeled as an outlet, a news outlet of QAnon conspiracies. We were censored by social networks and by ad networks. But what we reported, all that, it has since been proven true. Establishment news media, meanwhile, they did the opposite. New York Times and Washington Post, they even won Pulitzers for their investigations into the now debunked Trump-Russia story. Look, New York Times even wrote in 2019 in a statement that personally, I think they should seriously consider retracting. They said, "We're proud of our Pulitzer Prize winning reporting on Russian meddling in the 2016 elections. Every New York Times article cited has proven accurate." Yeah. Look, Trump, meanwhile, had called their Pulitzer Prizes, called them to be rescinded. He wrote on Twitter in 2019 this. He said, "So funny that the New York Times and Washington Post got Pulitzer Prizes for their coverage 100% negative and fake of collusion with Russia. And there was no collusion. So they were either duped or corrupt. In any event," he says, "the prizes should be taken away by the committee." And look, in case you're wondering what Representative Adam Schiff had to say about all this, one of the guys pushing a lot of these fake narratives, the Epoch Times asked him today, and yes, he said there was, in fact, he claims, evidence of Trump-Russia collusion. He actually told us, if you read Mr. Durham's report, what he said is that there wasn't evidence of collusion before they began the investigation. That's obviously a very important distinction. So, folks, what actually took place? Let me show you. Let's dig into it. Look, before Trump left office back in 2020, his Attorney General at the time, Bill Barr, appointed a special counsel to investigate Crossfire Hurricane. Crossfire Hurricane was the code name that the FBI had given to their intelligence investigations, counterintelligence investigation. And that was looking into the alleged links between Russian officials and associates of Donald Trump. Look, that led to spy operations and fake media hit pieces against Trump and his associates, and even to arrests of people that were close to him. Like, for example, the pre-dawn raid on Trump's former campaign manager, Paul Manafort. This all started when Trump was still a presidential candidate. It continued through most of his presidency. It undermined his campaign, and it undermined his ability to govern when he was president. And it turned out that the FBI's Crossfire Hurricane investigation was launched using the Steele dossier. And it turned out that that was phony, fake, opposition research from the Clinton campaign and from the DNC. That's the Democratic National Committee. In other words, fake and partisan opposition research was used to weaponize the FBI, to mislead voters in the 2016 election, and to shroud as well Trump's presidency using fake, manufactured controversy. And then what happened? They used the FBI's fraudulent investigation to get Special Counsel Robert Mueller appointed from 2017 to 2019 in an outright attempt to remove a sitting president from office and to possibly even recommend criminal charges against him. In most countries, if you saw this happen in like Latin America, for example, this would be considered an attempted palace coup. That's what you would call it. And then Mueller's fraudulent investigation was used to mislead American voters on the next two elections. First was the midterm election in 2018. Democrats won 41 seats in the House of Representatives. Again, folks, what do you call it when a faction uses a stratagem to displace another faction in politics? Back to what we discussed. And that displacement wasn't even satisfied with the taking of Congress. That gave them the majority they needed to impeach Trump, and impeach Trump they did. In fact, he became the first president to be impeached twice. Then there was the 2020 elections. Everything else aside, all the other issues we saw, set them aside. The Russian disinformation narrative, they extended that, the Biden campaign, and also former leaders of the intelligence community, to again mislead American voters and to censor the American press. They concocted fraudulent claims that these stories on Hunter Biden's laptop, they claimed, again, the laptop of Joe Biden's son, they said it looked like Russian disinformation. And that fake narrative was used to suppress legitimate news reports on that story. And look, polls showed that that story alone could have flipped enough votes to change the outcome of the elections. That brings us to where we are right now. Special Counsel John Durham, he just released his report 4 years into the making, into what just took place. In his conclusion, it's that the FBI launched the Crossfire Hurricane investigation on false premises. They did not interview people connected with this whole case before launching it. It says, again, in the 316-page report, it details serious abuses of power, serious abandonment of common practice. It notes in particular that, quote, there was a complete lack of information from the intelligence community that corroborated the hypothesis upon which the Crossfire Hurricane investigation was predicated. In other words, it was groundless. It shows, it says, that the FBI was willing to make use of the completely unvetted and uncorroborated Steele reporting in its multiple spy requests on American citizens. They spied on Americans using that. It says as well they were unable to corroborate any claims from the Steele dossier. And so those of you wondering the partially false or partially true Steele dossier, they could not corroborate any claims from it. It shows as well the Clinton campaign financed and pushed much of the evidence, including false evidence, which the FBI just accepted wholesale. The list of problems goes on and on and on in that report. What it essentially says is that the whole thing was fake. And of course, it also doesn't recommend any charges. So we'll see what, if anything, gets changed. But look, changed or not, the impact on public opinion could be big. And there's still a real chance for accountability. President Trump reacted to this on Truth Social. He said this, "Wow, After extensive research, Special Counsel John Durham concludes the FBI should not, he says, have launched the Trump-Russia probe. In other words, the American public was scammed, just as it is being scammed right now by those who don't want to see greatness for America. And the FBI, meanwhile, well, they actually publicly acknowledge problems in the investigation, but it looks like they don't plan to change anything else. They claim this in a public statement, quote, "The conduct in 2016 and 2017 that Special Counsel Durham examined was the reason that current FBI leadership already implemented dozens of corrective actions which have now been in place for some time." Now, the problem with that? Well, we've been seeing ongoing issues with the FBI, including very recently. This is part of the reason why House Republicans are leading investigations into the FBI and the allegations of weaponizing the government. And you can expect that to play big in the 2024 elections, especially when many Republican candidates are calling for either the reform or even the outright shutdown of the FBI. And again, this goes right back to the big elephant in the room. This was not just some fumbled investigation. This was a political scandal perpetrated through collusion between a political campaign, a political party, the intelligence community, the media, and by big tech. And they all worked hand in hand to undermine elections, to launch political takeovers, and to attempt to remove a sitting president from office. If that happened in any other country, we have a name for that. We call it a palace coup.